This is a tough one. I have an editorial that's coming out in the Washington Post tomorrow about this topic, about my own thinking about it. And obviously, you know, as governor, I mean, as a mayor of Richmond, with the city council, when I was first elected, we had the second highest homicide rate in the United States. And then as governor during the horrible shooting at Virginia Tech, you know, it makes you sit and think. And you know, it's how tragic it is that we had a shooting at Virginia Tech, but since then it's been Aurora and Milwaukee and Tucson and Newtown, and before that it was Columbine, and it's just like, is it just going to be an endless list? Well, human beings are human beings, and they'll do bad things. We're not going to stop human beings from doing bad things, but we ought to be able to reduce the fact that it's just one horrible mass shooting after the next. What I learned in Richmond and in Virginia, in the aftermath of Virginia Tech, is you can bring gun violence down. You actually can reduce it. You have to be willing to take concrete steps, and many of the steps aren't about guns. You know, some, I would say, kind of on the left side of the spectrum would say immediately you just got to focus on doing this, that, or the other thing about guns. An awful lot of what has to happen to reduce gun crime is not about guns. It's about mental health. It's about campus or school security protocols and communication. Those are important things, and when we got some of those things right in Richmond, we dropped our homicide rate, and when we did some of those in the aftermath of Virginia Tech, we made all college campuses safer. But I do believe that some of them are also about guns. I think background records check system. I'm a gun owner. I know a lot of gun owners, and the vast majority of those that I know don't have trouble with the notion of we better keep guns out of the hands of people who are dangerous. So if you are a felon, if you're under domestic violence protective order, if you've been adjudicated mentally ill and dangerous, it is already illegal for you to have a weapon, and yet the only way to enforce that law is to have a vigorous background records check. I also personally don't believe that combat weapons and these killer magazines are needed for either self-defense or hunting or any other legitimate purpose. It's important, if you go down the path of looking at that you define things really carefully and precisely, because sometimes people talk about banning assault weapons, but then they'll define it in a way that would ban weapons that people might use for hunting or shooting sports or things like that. So you got to be really precise. I hope the Vice President's going to come out with a set of recommendations tomorrow. I hope it's not just gun recommendations, because even if those recommendations are right, it sends the wrong message. It sends the message that we're going to solve this if we just deal with gun issues. The point that you made, Ray Thurman, about school security, you know, I take a slightly different view than some, again, on the Democratic side. When folks talk about, you know, armed school security, a lot of them say, well, that's a bad idea. But look, in the city of Richmond, we've had police officers and sheriff's folks in many of our middle schools and high schools for a long time who are armed. I think, and it was interesting, there was a poll last week that showed a kind of an interesting popular feeling in Virginia about this. The proposal to arm teachers, 2/3 of Virginia say that's a horrible idea, because teachers got plenty to do. I mean, you know, they've got a pretty tough job already. Make them armed security guards too. I mean, that's a great way to get nobody to want to be a teacher. But the notion of trained security folks in school buildings is something that already happens in many communities, and so long as there's training, and you can have a security guard who may not only be armed, but can help teach others about appropriate security protocols and monitor security in the building. Your typical, you know, vice principal, Madam Superintendent, isn't a trained security professional, and is not going to be the person who's going to necessarily know what the security is. So having more security in schools, we may have to go that direction. It has a cost. You guys have already had budgets from the state level and others that have shrunk. And so the solution of just saying we need more security in schools, well, for all of us who are saying it, are we willing to, if that's the answer, are we willing to fund it? That's pretty important.